Maiden of Candlelight and Lotuses, The Junning High Chronicles, by Anastasis Blythe, narrated by Talon David. For Nana, I miss you. Chapter 1. Liena didn't think it was a crime to complete the tasks assigned to her. Thus, it took her a few minutes to figure out why Ma would have her "I'm furious" look when she came charging out of their hut. Liena swiped the sweat from her brow, wincing from the sun, and straightened. She gauged the distance between her and Ma and decided she could probably harvest a few more heads of millet in the time it took Ma to reach her. It was only after she'd turned back to work that she realized why Ma was angry. "Oh!" she cried, immediately stopping and spinning back toward Ma, who was flailing her arms and gesturing much more wildly than necessary. She cupped her hands over her mouth and shouted, "I'll finish this row and come back to the house." "Come now!" came Ma's wailed response. "Or we'll be late, and then whatever will become of us?" Liena chewed the inside of her cheek, glancing up at the sun again. They still had 2 hours, and it wouldn't take her that long to get ready. But Ma would not be put off. Heaving a sigh, she picked up her basket, hefted it to her shoulder, and trudged back toward the house. "I don't think we need 2 hours to get ready," she said calmly to her mother when she caught up. "And if we don't finish this harvest, we'll starve, I know," said Ma flippantly. "But if you don't find a husband, then you'll definitely starve." Which was worse, starving now or starving in 15 years? Liena kept silent. "Lao Lao prepared a bath for you," Ma continued prattling as they returned to the hut. "You look wretched. I know you think it'll only take 15 minutes to get ready, but you've got miles of grime caked to your skin." Liena could see the top of Pa's lanky form peeking over the stalks of millet in the left field. Her heart clenched a little tighter. If she was gone all day at the matchmaker's, then he would have to work extra hard, and that would take a tremendous toll on his bad hip. If only Liena had been a son, or better yet, 3 sons. "Oh, look, it's Mulan," said Ma in a hushed whisper, grabbing Liena's arm and smiling toward the roadside where a boy around 17 years old strode by. Liena had known him for her whole life from a distance. He was the son of their local butcher, and in her mother's words, was a rather nice boy. She'd never spoken to him, though. "Just think if you could marry the butcher's boy," said Ma once he'd passed them. "Do you think they eat meat regularly? Imagine the luxury. You'd be set for life. We need to hurry so we're not late for the matchmaker." The matchmaker would never match a butcher's son and a farmer's daughter. Liena was too far below him. But that didn't stop Ma from dreaming. It didn't stop Liena from sighing as she dumped her basket of millet heads onto the waiting pile. The moment the door swung open to their hut, she should have expected it. She should have dodged or timed her entry better, but she was lost in thought, lost in a last forlorn glance over her shoulder at the work she'd abandoned, when the cane descended upon her prone arm. "Ow!" Liena cried, jerking back and glaring down at the scowling set of wrinkles before her. "You'll bruise me for the matchmaker." Lao Lao's cane tapped the dirt floor threateningly, her face severe and completely unremorseful. "What's wrong with you, girl? Forgetting all about the matchmaker?" "We're not late," Liena protested. But Ma was already hustling her into the corner where Pa had set up the tub. When Ma said that Lao Lao had prepared the bath, what she meant was that Lao Lao had sat outside the hut caterwauling until Pa had come to do her bidding. The water was tepid, and she was glad it wasn't icy like the streams. Ma stripped off Liena's robes so fast she didn't have time to be embarrassed before she was shoved into the small wooden tub. "I hate how this thing leaks," said Lao Lao, tapping her cane disapprovingly on it. "Ma, why are you washing me? You haven't helped me wash since—" Yes, well, today is different. Now quit your squawking and hold still. Don't you want me to help? Whap! For someone as old and slow as Lao Lao, her cane sure moved like lightning. Liena gasped and pulled her stinging hand into her chest. Listen to your mother, Lao Lao snapped. I wasn't. And no talking back. Lao Lao waved her cane threateningly. Liena swallowed her protests, grumbles, and eye rolls in quick succession. She'd vexed Lao Lao, and there was nothing she could do but feign penitence until Lao Lao forgot why she was angry. If only we had more money for proper paint, Ma whined as she helped Liena out of the tub and into a borrowed set of robes. Charcoal works just as well as any of that fancy stuff, said Lao Lao, whacking the makeshift fireplace. What's all this fuss? Came a new voice from the door. All 3 pairs of eyes turned at Pa's silhouette against the noonday sun. Liena finished tying off the sash at her waist, leapt away from her mother's charcoal-smeared fingers, and ran to him. Save me, she cried, flinging her arms around him. He laughed, starting to wrap one dirty arm around her. Don't touch her, shrieked Ma and Lao Lao at once. Pa's eyes twinkled, but he stepped back so he wouldn't muss her, chucking her chin affectionately. You be a good girl for your ma and grandma. Be a good girl for the matchmaker, growled Lao Lao. Doesn't matter if she's a wretch here. Well, Liena is not a wretch here, so she won't be at the matchmaker's, said Ma, with a warning glance that completely contradicted her words. If Liena didn't know that her mother was just a fusser, she might have been offended. If you get yourself a respectable match today, said Pa, then I'll let you sleep late tomorrow. Sleep late? I couldn't possibly. I'm not being helpful at all today. Liena wrung her hands around her 2 big sleeves. He leaned in and planted a kiss on her forehead, smiling as he did so. Going to the matchmaker's is the best thing you can do today, little dove. Because if Liena found a good husband to marry, one with a way to support his family, then she would ensure her parents were well taken care of in their sunset years. But still, if they didn't finish this harvest before the first frost, then they would starve this winter. And what was the point of having an auspicious husband-to-be if she starved before she could marry him? Liena, said Pa, his voice sounding strangely far away. What's the matter? She looked up at him, but he began drifting away from her. A wave of heat washed over her, one so potent it made her want to rip off these unfamiliar robes and jump into the nearest icy stream. Liena? Liena! She opened her mouth to tell them she was fine, just suddenly feeling a little strange, but then she hit something hard. The ground. She'd hit the ground. Had she fallen? Her limbs seemed to be sucked by some otherworldly force down, 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 into the earth, into an undug grave. The world grew darker. Was she dying? Before she could crawl to her feet, lavender light burst all around her. It swallowed the hut, swallowed the noonday sun shining through the doorway, swallowed herself. She lost control of her body, lost control of everything. Everything save her heart-pounding fear. Was she truly dying? Then the all-encompassing lavender light clarified, and Liena saw something. Not a family member's worried face, the wooden tub in the corner, or Lao Lao's cane. No, something entirely different. Something like she had never seen before. She stood in a dark, unfamiliar room. The edges glowed lavender, rendering the entire picture blurry. She could make out no details except the window she faced. It opened into the night, and a full moon hung low in the sky. Silhouetted against that moon was a tall, distinctly masculine figure. "I'll be back for you. Be ready when I come." Desperate anger and a deadly sword of love stabbed into her core, and she reeled backward, gasping. The image fled, leaving her in blinding, pulsing lavender light. Even after the image was gone, she felt it. Those strange pinpricks of impressions that plucked at her mind, insistent. She was lost to the snarling forces around her, could think of nothing but how much she pitied the hazy man as he leapt out of the window and was swallowed by moon and shadows. She had no idea why she felt those emotions, the anger, the love, the pity. Some of those emotions seemed to come from herself, but others seemed to come from elsewhere. From him? The lavender light eased slightly, enough that she could hear screams and shouts filling her mortal ears. There was a strange scraping sound. Odd buzzing chatter. Fearful. With each breath, the light faded, and Liena became more aware of her body. Realized the screams she heard came from her own mouth. Despite her attempts to stop, her straining vocal cords continued to shriek of their own accord. But she could feel the screams now, feel how her body arched with them. Her arms flung, mostly flailing in air, but sometimes connecting with something solid. Abruptly, the last bit of light dissipated, leaving her voiceless. Her entire body sagged with relief, weakness, and released strain. For a long moment, she could do naught but lie on the dirt floor, her nice borrowed clothes now bedraggled. Her hair had come loose of its scarf, and she sucked strands into her mouth with every heaving breath. She'd never felt so weak in her entire life. "Liena! Liena! Liena! Liena!" She was surrounded, blinking against exhaustion so sheer she almost gave in to death that very moment. Her gaze cleared. There. Ma, Pa, Lao Lao. "Liena, wake up! What has happened to you?" Ma cried, dragging Liena's limp arms up in a fruitless attempt to help her sit. Liena only fell back heavily, caught and arranged by Pa so her head rested in his lap. She looked up, parting her lips. Her tongue cleaved to the roof of her mouth. Her throat was dry. Her voice was hoarse, brittle like the ginger candy she had only seen children eat in the markets and never tasted herself. Yet she spoke, focusing all her attention on her Pa's wide-eyed worry. "I saw a vision." Liena was still wearing the borrowed robes, sitting on the floor of the hut, as her parents and grandma chattered incessantly about this new development. She apparently wasn't going to the matchmaker today, after all. "Oh, my dove, your magic is such a gift! Such an unexpected, sudden gift! Just think, if everything goes well at the academy, we might not need to be farmers anymore. You can get a wonderful appointment, have a salary, Liena. No more digging in the dirt, no more sowing and harvesting. You can make something of yourself. You could make an auspicious match. You could have powerful, magical children. Think of what this could mean for your children. We could give you nothing but life as a poor farmer's daughter, but you could give your children so much more." Through the barrage of plans and the sudden explosion of dreams for the future, Liena only managed to ask, "What if I end up being appointed to hunt Mwagwe?" Lao Lao immediately scoffed, chomping her gums loud enough to echo through the entire hut. "Hunt monsters, dear girl." She lifted her cane and tapped Liena's wincing head with it. "Oh no, you're a seer. Your magic is not battle magic. You'll end up in the capital. Maybe even the palace." "The palace!" Ma exclaimed. "Imagine the auspicious matches available there." It was decided that the entire family must go to the village to help Liena buy enough food for the journey south to the capital, where the academy was. She found herself insisting that no, she did not need sticky buns. They would be entirely too impractical. No, she did not need jewelry, even for the occasion. "Remember," Liena said to her mother, "they provide clothes for me. What I have is suitable for the journey." "And show up to those handsome academy boys wearing this." Ma sniffed as she pinched the sleeve of Liena's threadbare robes. I'm sure it won't.
Oh, there's Shuda. Come, let us go tell her the news.
She has likely already heard.
Nonsense.
Pa had disappeared into the crowd, doubtlessly to brag to his acquaintances. Ma dragged Liena after her toward a short, severe-faced woman who regarded Liena with several upraising glances, as if to say, "This is a seer?" It seems I have become a prized cow, Liena thought to herself as her cheeks were pinched and patted as strangers, half-acquaintances, and friends alike studied the length of her. Every so often, someone would chime, "One of my relatives' sons had a friend who had magic. Turned straight up out of nowhere like this." This was such a waste of time. She could have made the trip by herself, could have avoided her parents spending far more than necessary of their very meager funds for food, and could have escaped notice. With all the attention her ma and Lao Lao garnered for her, she could be an entire traveling circus act all by herself. The day waned before Liena's eyes. They were still at the market, still strutting around like peacocks, and they hadn't bought even half of what they came for. Yet somehow they'd spent twice the amount of money necessary. Every clink of a copper tangu sent her wincing and pleading that they should not spend their money so frivolously. The family celebration would not be dimmed. Magic in the family changed everything.
"Oh, just this once, my dear,"
Ma kept saying. Meanwhile, Liena's thoughts were a tight ball of anxiety. They'd left the crops for too long. How would they ever catch up on all this lost time? How would her family manage without her? What if something happened to them? What if they couldn't finish the harvest in time? And what if she didn't hear about it for months or even years? Would she even be able to see her family again? Ever? Lao Lao skittered across the market, scattering squawking chickens and accidentally thumping her cane on unsuspecting toes. She held something up in one hand, a large and gummy grin splitting her weathered face.
"Look, girl, look what I found for you. It's perfect."
Ma gasped behind her, prodding Liena forward even as she insisted, "I'm sure it's perfect, but I don't think—" Lao Lao smacked Liena's knuckles with her cane.
"Stop your sniveling, child. It's perfect, you hear?"
Liena clutched her smarting hand to her chest, but she shut her mouth and nodded with furrowed brows. Ma squealed as Lao Lao held out a beautiful beaded necklace on a leather cord. It couldn't have been very expensive, but it was still frivolous. What use had she for decorations and ornaments? It was better spent on yams and rice to fill bellies. But then her grandmother pressed the beads into Liena's hand, and her own eyes widened as she saw the smooth, painted wood beads. On the centermost one, painted so tiny it was almost unrecognizable, was a blooming lotus. Despite everything, despite her dominating practicality, she exhaled softly as she studied it and ran her finger over that center bead. She knew the many wives of the emperor wore jewelry far finer than this, but somehow she couldn't dream of seeing anything more beautiful. She couldn't help her smile or her honest admission. "I love it."
"I knew you would,"
Lao Lao said with a wink.
"It has your namesake."
"Put it on," Ma cried. "Put it on." They stayed at the market until well after sundown, mingling with the good folk there, retelling the well-known news of Liena's magic. She tried to hang back as much as possible, but her fingers kept finding her necklace and touching the lotus bead. There was no time for Liena to voice the thoughts swirling through her mind. Am I too old? Too late? Would her family survive without her? What if this was all some wild mistake? Chapter 2.
"Here's a new student."
"Better be the last,"
came the responding growl. Liena blinked, clutching her small bundle of belongings to her chest, and stared at the figure on the opposite side of the office. It was a dark room, with crimson curtains drawn over the windows and a low ceiling. The air was full with the smell of musty tea leaves and other things that she'd never smelled before. Smells she guessed were associated with the stacks of scrolls on the squatty desk, in a basket nearby, and on shelves along the far wall. A woman scribbled away at the desk, her back straight even as she bent over her work. She sat cross-legged on her mat, her long, gray-streaked hair pooling on the floor behind her.
Now that I've gotten you here, I'll be off,
said the short man who had greeted her as she trudged up, exhausted and wide-eyed, to the academy gates. All he'd done was ask what she was doing, frowned as he looked her over, then escorted her inside. He didn't seem to care that she gawked at the large complex, the expansive sandy area that must be what they called the pits, and the curved arrangement of the buildings. "Where are all the students?" she had asked.
In class, of course,
he had said. He abandoned her now. Liena tried not to shuffle her feet awkwardly, but despite her best efforts, her fingers found the sash of her robes. She twisted it fretfully. Why did the woman before her not turn around? Was Liena supposed to say something? When in doubt, stay silent. "Name," came the sharp word from the woman. She didn't turn, only dipped a quill into a pot of ink and kept scribbling. Would Liena learn to read and write here? The thought sent a thrill shooting all the way to her toes, enough to nearly quell the suffocating homesickness and sense of misplacement. "Song Liena," she said.
What? Speak up, girl.
Liena straightened, drew a deep breath, and enunciated. "Song Liena." The quill stopped. Liena forced her hands back down to her side. "Don't be nervous." The woman turned. Liena sucked in a breath and bit her tongue in surprise. Where the woman's left eye should have been, there was an empty socket. A long scar ran from the middle of her forehead down to her ear. No eye patch or scarf or anything to hide the visage. Her one good eye, however, was narrowed to a slit.
How old are you, girl?
Liena found her voice with difficulty. "I am 16, ma'am."
Master, not ma'am. Master. Master Ku. And why, pray, have you come to the academy so late?
"My magic has only just developed. I came as soon as it did."
What is your magic, girl?
"I am a seer, master."
Not surprising. Low magic, I presume?
"Low magic?"
Can you control your magic?
Master Ku snapped.
Did you conjure your first vision, or did it come out of nowhere?
"I did not conjure it."
Low magic, most likely, then. We'll have to test it just in case.
Liena's eyes flew wide as her hands fisted in the fabric of her travel-worn robes. "Test?"
Oh, not that test. Don't look so terrified, girl. Besides, if you're going to succeed here, you will need to conquer a fear of pain.
At this, the woman stood up from her mat, rising to an impressive height. Liena tried not to crane her neck backward as she approached and stared her down with one narrowed eye. She stopped a mere foot from her. Liena swallowed. Her rational mind told her not to be frightened. After all, Master Ku had no reason to hurt her. These were just intimidation tactics, nothing more. They worked anyway.
Rice farmer?
Asked the woman. "Millet?"
From the north?
Liena nodded. Fast as lightning, the woman's hand darted out, snatched her chin, and tilted her face to the side. Liena tried not to flinch.
Your accent betrays your heritage, said the woman. Part barbarian, are you not?
Was that a problem? Or uncommon here, so far from the border? Of all the things Liena expected them to criticize about her, her parentage was not one of them. "I am," she said only. Came the displeased response. Heat crawled up her neck. but she forced calm and even breaths through her nose. If they turned her away, she would simply... How could she get home? She had used up all of her supplies and money to get here. She would think of something. Later. If it came to that. Right now, she had other things to worry about. Master Ku released her grip.
I see you are alarmed by my eye. Do you care to know what happened to it?
Yes, but also no. Liena said nothing.
A dragon tore it out, she said without preamble, and ate it. Then I ran my sword through its neck and tore out both of its eyes. Now the Mwagwe sits on my wall.
For a horrible moment, Liena expected to see a pair of bloodied eyes pinned to the wall when the woman gestured behind her. But instead, hung above the desk she'd been writing at a few minutes ago, was a scaly amethyst hide. She wouldn't have guessed it had once been a dragon. She shuddered.
Do you know the kind of world you're getting into, girl?
Liena shook her head honestly. There was a self-satisfied smirk and huff, then Master Ku proceeded, gliding toward the purple dragon skin on the wall. Her black robes trailed behind her.
Most of our students come between the ages of 5 and 7. The vast majority graduate by 20. Then they receive their career appointments. Some stay here in Suguan to work at the palace, or in the bureaucracy. But most take their appointments in military, or in cities around the empire. They are the wielders of the empire, and they protect our people. What do they protect our people from?
From the Mwagwe?
And?
Invasions?
And?
Liena blinked, searching for another response. Crime? Master Ku snorted but didn't correct her.
For our wielders to withstand such trials, do you think they come here to be coddled for their talent?
Liena shook her head.
No, indeed. We work our students hard. They face dangers here they would face on the field. In fact, we push them so hard that some of them don't survive.
The woman fixed her with a heavy stare now, as if expecting Liena's knees to buckle beneath the weight of her fear. But though her heart skipped a beat inside her chest, though ice swept down her spine, she kept her expression as solemn and neutral as she could.
We had 5 die last year, the woman continued. All bright, talented individuals. 1 died of exhaustion and strain. She had a health condition she didn't know about, and her body couldn't handle the rigor.
A stone dropped into Liena's gut.
2 died in the pits while battling an opposing student. The 4th wasn't paying close enough attention in his poisons and foreign substances class. And the last died from a Mwagwe attack during a hunt. Not to mention the student who almost died because of issues in detention.
Her head suddenly felt like it was a fluffy cloud floating away from her body. But now was not the time to faint. Judging by the tiny smirk playing at the edges of Master Ku's mouth, Liena's face had probably gone green or white. She swallowed, pressing her sweaty hands to her sides. Anything to keep them from twisting her sash.
This isn't a nice little boarding school, girl. This is the academy. It is the most rigorous school in the entire empire, and the most rigorous experience you will ever endure. And you're about 10 years behind.
Chapter 3. Another master came to collect her from Master Ku. When Liena peered up at him, she found a warm smile awaiting her. It was set in a pleasant face, one with surprisingly soft lines and a welcoming light in his eyes. The tension flowed like water out of Liena's limbs. Bolstered by his kindness, she smiled back.
I'm Master Zheng, he said. I am here to guide you to your dormitory. Please follow me.
Behind her, she could feel the eye of Master Gu on her back, felt the weight of a sightless stare. She pushed away her premonition, telling herself that she was only grateful that she was still allowed to attend the academy.
We do not typically have students come at your age,
said Master Zhang.
You're a special case.
Something about his words made her feel a little taller, like she could stand straighter. Everything seemed wrong about all of this, but this master reminded her that not long ago, she thought she was just another ordinary girl. Now she was officially a magic-wielder of the Empire. Perhaps things could be better for her family. She reached up and touched the beads at her throat. Perhaps things wouldn't be as bad as the master made it seem. After all, Liena was no stranger to hard work. She grew up on a farm. She knew rigor. She was no soft lord's daughter. Her hands were strong and calloused, her limbs and body toned. Finding her voice, she said, I know I'm late, but I am prepared to work hard. She meant it, too.
Keep up that attitude. It will serve you well here. You're behind, but with effort and determination, I'm sure you will do just fine.
She smiled, reassured again, and felt lighter with each step. This wouldn't be that bad. At least when I get my appointment. Such a weird thing to say. She had never thought she would get an appointment. I won't have to fight Moi Gui since I'm a seer. The master's steps slowed, his smile fading immediately. He glanced at her, then looked away. What? She said quietly, suddenly afraid. Shall I be appointed to fight Moi Gui? He let out a great gust of a sigh. Before he answered, he beckoned her down the hallway. A hallway that was brilliant crimson, with sunlight pouring through latticed screens and catching on the gold detail on the sapphire paint of the ceiling, swept out before her. It was the grandest thing she'd ever seen. If the academy was this fine, how majestic must the palace be?
Sweet girl,
said the master gently.
You are one of the most likely candidates for monster fighting. You do not have battle magic, and you are a low magic wielder. You will likely be given a post in a village, and you will be little more than a deputy, fighting crime and monsters alike. When you have visions, you will be required by law to submit them for review. Is it the most practical matching of magic and skill to an appointment? No, but that's the way things are.
Suddenly, everything felt larger and more intimidating, and she felt smaller. The ceiling seemed to soar higher above her, the weight of the air pressing down on her shoulders. A Moi Gui hunter? She bit her lip but forced down the sudden flare of panic. Everything will be all right. She simply needed to be rational about this. There was no reason for her to worry about her appointment now, when she needed to be focused on catching up on the years she had missed. One of the doors ahead opened, and a tall young man strode out. He was wearing white robes like the ones that Liena held in her arms. He wasn't just tall, but broad as a mountain, with shoulders whose breadth stretched the fabric of his robes. His black hair was coiled up on his head, half falling out of the fastening pins. His face was slicked with sweat, beads of it sliding down the cut of his jaw. He was easily the handsomest man she'd ever seen. He strode past her without a glance. A master in black scurried after him, slamming the door closed in his hurry. "Highness!" he called after the young man.
"Thank you," replied the young man crisply. "But I am well capable of fulfilling the Emperor's summons on my own. I won't lose myself if that's what you're worried about. You're dismissed."
The master gawked after him, and Liena swiveled her head to watch the young man march down the corridor. His gait was one of purpose, of authority, as if he was the master of these walls. She didn't mean to gape, but when she finally glanced back at her escort, she realized her mouth was hanging open.
"The dormitories are just around the bend here,"
said Master Zhang. "Was that one of the princes?" she asked.
"Indeed. The Crown Prince himself.
She paused, trying to decide if she should ask more questions or leave it be. His magic. He's a fire wielder?
Indeed.
The master seemed brisker now, as though he was made uncomfortable by her questions. He walked faster, his head faced forward, unlike hers, which kept craning back to peek another glance. She decided to drop the subject, but that didn't stop her curiosity from bubbling up to the surface. She tried to clamp down on that, too. Snap it together, Liena. He may be handsome, but that doesn't mean... It doesn't mean anything. She drew herself taller, straighter, and decided she wasn't going to think about him. Her grandma's words to find a husband here rang through her mind. There would be plenty of other young men. Plenty of other handsome men. And if Liena was being realistic, she now knew that her magic was not going to raise their position in society much. As much as she hated to admit it, her best chance would be to find a husband with stronger magic who would have her. As if anyone would want to wed a half-barbarian millet farmer. Beggars couldn't be choosers. Handsome wasn't something she could care about.
Here's your dorm. Your dorm mate will be back soon once she's done with class. You have time to wash up for supper, change, and get settled. Do you see that hallway? Take a left, head down that hallway until you exit the building. Then just follow the crowd of students to the mess hall. Do you have any last questions before I leave you?
So many. No, but thank you. Perhaps she could ask her dorm mate later once she'd gotten to know her better. She glanced around the tiny room, the patterned, paper-thin walls, and noted the two mats on either side of the room. She set down her bundle on the floor next to the mat, then poked at the plush head cushion. There was no water, so it took her a bit of wandering around to find the communal washroom where she could clean herself up. The white robes she donned were the finest thing she had ever seen or touched, except... Carefully, she ran her fingers over the beaded necklace at her throat. It was a little dusty, so she eased it off and wiped each bead, focusing special attention on the lotus bead. Chapter 4. The mess hall was loud. There were hundreds of students in identical white robes funneling into the small mess hall. She was immediately caught in a tidal wave of white, nearly losing herself in the throng. Feeling small and insignificant was not a pleasant feeling, but it was accompanied by a sense of invisibility, which she was glad for. She was invisible until she bumped into someone who apparently thought it was a good idea to wriggle her way upstream through the crowd of people. "Hey!" said the girl. Her brow was darkened, furrowed with irritation. But then she stopped once she saw Liena. Her eyes swept over her, landing on the sash at her middle. "Hey!" she said again in a completely different tone, a slow smile curving up her lips. "You're new, aren't you? What's your name?" Why did Liena immediately bristle? The tone was by no means unkind. Surely she wasn't made uncomfortable by the fact that the girl was beautiful, with long, fluttering lashes and a tall, willowy form. That would be petty of her. "My name is Liena," she said, mustering enough courage to smile. "What a pretty name. Unusual, too. Mine is Mao Shu." She paused, letting her eyes drift over Liena again in assessment. "So you're new? At your age?" Liena tried not to get shuffled by the crowd as Shu stared at her with a brimming smile, heedless of how she stopped the flow of traffic. "Yes, my magic just developed." "Fathers, I didn't know people could develop magic so late," Shu exclaimed with a too bright smile that flashed a row of white teeth. "What's your magic? I bet your family was very excited. Oh, sorry, please excuse me, I've got to go." Liena followed the trail of the girl's attention to see a tall figure moving through the crowd parallel to them. Her stomach immediately knotted up, and she bit her lip to keep from gaping again at the Crown Prince. "Let me know if you need anything," said Shu. My sister over there has been here for a couple years. I'm sure she'd be glad to help. Bye! With that, Shu scurried off after the prince, and Liena felt a pang of jealousy. She glanced toward where the girl had pointed and found that said sister was about 10 years old, sitting cross-legged at one of the long rows of tables, laughing with a crew of 10-year-old friends. Liena bit her lip again, her hands moving unconsciously to her necklace. She just had to find a place to eat. It didn't matter that she didn't know anyone yet. She would get to know people soon enough. Students were taking seats, arranging themselves at the long, low rows of tables laden with bowls of food. Liena marveled at the ease with which the young people of both genders interacted, mingling together like it was completely normal. She would have been fodder for gossip back home if she dared address a boy. It appeared things were done differently here, and if she didn't sit down somewhere, she'd be the only one still standing. Her cloak of invisibility would be gone, and everyone would notice the awkward new student. But sitting down among strangers was almost as terrifying of an option. She scoured the mess hall, trying not to gape at the beautiful ceiling designs, until she happened to spot a lone figure sitting on the far side of the room. He sat at the very end of the farthest table, near a white and red ornamental screen and a life-sized replica of a phoenix. It was a young man, his head tilted down with his elbow propped on the table. His hair was tied back in a long queue, as typical. She couldn't get a good view of his face from here. With a deep sigh, she gripped her robes with both hands and marched toward him. He might turn her away, certainly. Might send her off to sit with someone else. But something about the set of his shoulders, and something else she couldn't name, made her think he could use a smile. If that was the case, then perhaps another lonely soul could brighten his day a little. If he didn't growl at her to leave him alone. She approached him purposefully but cautiously, waiting for any sign that he'd seen her and didn't want her to come. He didn't look up. Not until she was standing before him on the opposite side of the table did he slowly swivel his face up to hers. He was just about her age, 16 or 17, slender and lean, with long limbs that betrayed his height. His dark eyes were softer than she'd expected, though his mouth was turned down in a frown. His brows cocked, half in question, half in confusion. The latter was revealed by the little furrow between his eyes. His mouth was full of food, his cheeks bulging out one side. He wasn't exactly handsome, but there was something about his face that she liked. Something that made her smile tentatively and say, "Hello, I'm Liena. May I sit with you?" His chopsticks stopped halfway between his bowl and his mouth.
With me?
He blurted, then shoved his hand toward his mouth as he choked on his food and set into a fit of coughing. "Oh, forgive me," Liena cried, dropping to her knees and casting about for some water. But he had already guzzled down his cup and was smacking his fist against his chest.
No, it's just me being cough. Stupid is all. Name's Liena?
She nodded, offering up a tight-lipped smile.
Song Liena.
Yours is?
I'm Feng Zedong.
Can I sit with you? He shrugged.
Won't stop you.
Taking that as invitation enough, she situated herself opposite him and began scooping food from the steaming platters into her own bowl. Her mouth immediately watered, and she could hardly believe the fragrant smells that wafted up to her nose. Academy students ate like this? There was rice enough to feed an army, though she supposed this was an army of sorts, and there was all variety of cooked vegetables and even multiple types of fish. At first, she thought she should be polite and take little, but her growling stomach overcame her mind's rationale. She heaped her bowl full, barely managing to keep her mouth closed so she didn't drool.
Hungry?
Zedong asked with a smirk. She blushed, her chopsticks slowing their return to her bowl.
I don't mean to. Dragons, just eat. There's more than enough. Here, try this. It's really good.
She winced at the swearing, but smiled when he snapped up a chunk of broiled fish with his chopsticks and set it atop her heaping bowl. She glanced around, noting how everyone was already eating.
Do people say blessings here before they eat?"
she whispered, leaning over the table. Zedong shrugged.
"Maybe some do. I don't know."
"So it's all right if I say one?"
He waved his hand.
"Do whatever you want."
She smiled again, lowered her chopsticks, and, despite how hungry she was, mumbled the blessing under her breath with her eyes closed. It wasn't long or elaborate, just something that her mother had taught her.
"So,"
Zedong said once she'd finished,
"what kind of magic do you have?"
She could hardly bring herself to answer before she tucked into her food.
"Seer.
You?" He wrinkled his face, reaching back one hand to rub his neck.
"My magic is weird.
Oh?
It's kind of complicated."
I'm listening. He chuckled. Was it her imagination, or did his eyes shine a little brighter than they had a moment ago?
"I can hear non-articulated exchanges of information. Sometimes."
You can hear what?
It just means that, well, you know how some people can communicate with looks? If I'm nearby and if my magic decides to work,
The words were laced in bitterness.
then I can understand it, even if I don't know anything about the people.
Liena chewed on this information as she ate. That seems complicated.
It is, and it's next to useless, even if it wasn't so spotty.
Why is it useless? It seems rather handy to me.
Because most nonverbal communication isn't verbal because it doesn't need to be verbal.
I'm sure there are plenty of circumstances where it is useful.
I'm awaiting the day,
He said grumpily, stabbing his chopsticks into his food.
It's so unpredictable that it took me a while to even know that I had magic. And when my parents and I finally realized that I did, we couldn't prove it. I had to undergo the test before I could set foot in the academy.
Liena's eyes went wide. You had to do the test? He nodded solemnly, then rolled up his sleeve. Punctuating the skin up his forearm and biceps were tiny white scars. Liena's stomach twisted. What he must have gone through.
"There's more scars, too," said Zedong.
He didn't offer to show her those. A shrill whistle sliced through the din of the mess hall. Everyone fell quiet. A sidelong glance at the students further up the table from her revealed that they'd set down their chopsticks, too. She followed suit. Zedong kept eating.
"Students of the Academy!"
Boomed a voice from the front of the room. Liena craned her neck to get a better view.
"Headmaster,"
Zedong whispered around a mouthful of rice. She gave him a grateful smile before returning her attention to the tall master in black robes. It was hard to get a clear view of him over all the shoulders and heads of her fellow students, but she caught a glimpse of a bald head, gray beard, and gray eyebrows.
"Students of the Academy,"
said the headmaster again. To Liena's surprise, he actually inclined his head toward them in a bow.
"The hope of Junning High."
Her lips were suddenly extraordinarily dry. She licked them, glancing at any of the other students to see if this was normal. No one else seemed to bat an eye. Most even straightened in their seats, though Zedong rolled his eyes and kept eating.
"In this room are the greatest talents of the next generation. It is not long before you will wear the mantle of Junning High's protection. It is not long before you will be academy masters, high government officials, city wardens, warriors in our military, generals, even territory guardians. Our empire will rest on your shoulders. That is why our curriculum is so rigorous, why we demand everything of you."
Liena stared at the bowl before her that had been so appetizing only moments ago. Now the thought of eating another bite sent her stomach turning. A sharp crack sounded. Her head shot up just in time to see the master lift his fist from the table he'd just pounded.
"Headmaster table breaker," muttered Sedong.
You are the future,
said the headmaster, impassioned.
and we will not leave the future in incapable hands. Apply yourselves diligently, and there will be a future for you. Make your families proud. Some of you come from nothing. This is your chance to be something. Some of you come from the proudest families in the Empire. This is your chance to fight for your legacy. Don't let it die. Don't be the shame of your family. Your place in Zhenning Hai, whether high or low, is not determined by birth, but by your magic, and how well you succeed here at the Academy. Rise up, you magic-wielders of Zhenning Hai. Fight for honor, for the honor of your family, for our Empire's future.
Whatever Sedong was grumbling across from her, the headmaster was right. This was Liena's chance to raise her family out of poverty, out of the constant cycle of sowing and harvest, with their entire livelihoods dependent on whether it rained or frosted. She was 10 years behind and about as disadvantaged as possible. But could she still fight for her family? As hard as this would be, she wasn't going to waste this opportunity to be something more. If it took every ounce of strength she had, so be it. She needed to graduate as quickly as she could, with as high marks as she could, so she could get her family out of poverty before they starved.
Class at 8th watch tomorrow,
said the headmaster.
As you were.
Chapter 5. Liena lost herself trying to find her dormitory. She poked around the corner outside, seeing the maze of covered paths and dozens of potential doors. Why hadn't she paid more attention when she came out earlier? She had been so focused on finding supper that she had lost her dormitory. A burst of laughter sounded nearby. Instinctively, she ducked around the corner, then chastised herself for appearing so suspicious. She just needed to act normally, and no one would realize she was new. She would blend in, and all would be fine. Except that these people seemed to have an eye for noticing new people. Even in a crowd, Shu had realized she was new. She drew in a deep breath and fortified herself. She would just walk around the corner like nothing was wrong and like she wasn't anxious out of her mind in this new place. One more deep breath. It would be fine. She was overthinking this. She forced one foot out before the other, making her way around the corner. She intended to keep her head down and not look up as she passed a laughing group of students. But then one called out, "Hey, Liena! It is Liena, right?" Her eyes widened, and she lifted her head to find herself the subject of 5 pairs of staring eyes. She tensed. Most of the faces she didn't recognize, except Shu, who was the one who'd called out to her, and, oh, her heart rate kicked up several notches and her breath snagged in her lungs. It was the prince, and he was looking at her. Her throat went dry as dirt. She couldn't even answer the question. All that she could manage was a tiny smile that probably looked utterly terrified. "First day of class tomorrow? Man, you're in for a rude awakening," said Shu with a laugh and a slightly unsettling twist of her lips. The others snorted, all except the prince, who wrinkled his face into something like a glare at Shu.
Are you trying to frighten her? He asked.
Shu rolled her eyes at him, then gave a nonchalant wave of her hand toward Liena. "You'll be fine, but it'll probably be a lot at first. I mean, how old are you?" Why did Liena feel weird about answering the question? "I'm 16. 16! I had no idea magic could develop so late."
"And I had no idea Shu apparently doesn't have a single ounce of tact,"
said the prince, lifting up both hands in exasperation, fixing a glare on Shu. One of the other young men with patchy stubble snorted.
"Shu? Tact? Poof! Where have you been all our lives, Nansu?"
The others laughed while the prince rolled his eyes, crossing his arms over his chest. Liena had to work to keep her smile in place as she slowly inched away. She was ready to bolt the moment their attention turned away from her. For a brief moment, she thought she was free. But Prince Nianzhu's gaze shifted to hers, his dark eyes full and potent, set in his handsome face. Suddenly, her feet wouldn't budge, rooted into the ground by the weight of his attention. One of his eyebrows seemed to quirk slightly, and she had the distinct impression he was measuring her.
Best of luck to you tomorrow,
he said, eyes not leaving hers for several heartbeats. One of the others called out,
"You'll need it!" "Fathers, you all are wretched!"
cried the prince. He swiveled his attention away from Liena toward his cackling friends. That was her cue to flee. Biting her lip, she hurried past them numbly. She simultaneously wanted to cry and grin, and the mixture was so stupid and confusing that she could only blink and keep walking. Trying to parse out that exchange would only confuse her more. She was just overthinking and overanalyzing. It took a while of poking around before she worked up the nerve to ask a friendly-looking girl where the dormitories were. The girl gave a funny look, one that Liena quickly answered with, "I'm new."
Oh, the girls' dormitories are over there.
The dormitories were full to the brim with girls getting ready for bed. A few were standing by the door, stretching themselves out at unnatural angles. Liena tried not to stare, especially at the girl who was literally wound around one of the awning support beams, her knees somehow twisted above her shoulders. They were all very young. Young, as in they were anywhere from 7 to 12 years old. Liena blinked, suddenly wondering if she'd gone to the wrong dormitory. But no, this one was hers, and this room... Her dorm mate came up to her chest.
"Oh, hello,"
came the chirped greeting. Hi?" said Liena with a tight smile. "Is this..."
"Yup, you're in the right place. My name is Jia. I heard you're new. I lost my dorm mate last year, so I didn't have anyone. And I guess they thought since you were new, you'd need to stay with someone who had been here for several years to help you out."
Liena smiled, still tight-lipped, down at the little girl. "How many years have you been here?"
5 years.
Liena blinked.
I came here when I was 5, so half of my life is here and half was at home.
10 years old. Your old dorm mate. You said she was lost? What do you mean?
Oh, I mean on the hunts. She got lost and no one ever found her, so they assumed Mwagwe got her.
Liena blanched. One of the 5 students. Somehow, it felt like bad luck to take this girl's cot in her absence. How old do you have to be to go on the hunts? She shrugged.
It depends. You go when the masters decide that you're ready, but that's usually around 9.
A kernel of hope blossomed in her chest. What if the masters deemed her unready for the hunts? Perhaps she could avoid it this year. What even were the hunts?
You should get some sleep, said the girl. Training is first thing tomorrow morning.
Training?
Yup.
Training in what?
Combat, of course. In the pits.
Combat. Of course. Right. Naturally. Liena shook her head, as if it would make her brain sort through all of this information. She should just go to sleep. She would wake up early, be at the pits before dawn, and then she would be able to process it all better. Exhausted minds and bodies were no good to anyone. The girl wasn't going to sleep yet. She began going through a stretch routine, and it looked so painful that Liena couldn't help but gawk. Though the girl's body was slender, it was strong and lined with muscle. When she had balanced her entire body upside down on her forearms, she didn't wobble. How in the world was Liena going to catch up? She curled up on her cot, resting her head on the cushion, and was almost instantly asleep. Liena intended to be the first out by the pits. That way, she could thoroughly prepare herself for what was ahead. As it turned out, it seemed like the entire academy was there before her. She was almost late. She had thought that half fifth watch would be plenty early, but apparently not. Was there a group she was supposed to join? The beginners group for combat? She looked around, spying everyone else wearing the same simple tan training tunic and coarse trousers that she did, and realized that there didn't seem to be much structure. In fact, as she watched, people peeled off into pairs and groups of 3 or 4 to begin fighting with one another. It was unintentional, the way her eyes picked out that tall, broad form across the pits. She didn't mean to notice him. It was entirely unpractical to do so. But she did anyway. Once she saw him, she almost couldn't drag her eyes away. The prince was grinning, holding a waxwood staff in both hands and fending off a barrel-chested opponent. She didn't know the names of his moves, knew nothing about any of this, but she could tell that he was good. Better than good. He moved with the lightness of someone half his size, but the power behind his blows was unmatched. He was standing over his opponent in a matter of seconds, grinning triumphantly. Why in all the 7 valleys was she blushing? Stupid, stupid, stupid. Hey! Liena whirled, forcing away the heat crawling up her neck. Zedong! The relief must have been evident in her voice because he gave her a sleepy smile.
"Want to practice with me?"
He yawned. "Yes," she said immediately, desperately.
"Now, you've got to know that I'm not very good, and I came late too, but I know a few things."
The next 2 hours dragged by. Liena tried not to get frustrated or to give up because of how exhausted she was. It wasn't even that Zedong was a hard master. He wasn't. But that no one else was stopping. Everyone kept drilling their battle skills until the sun was hot overhead. She was used to manual labor from dawn to dusk. But somehow even life on a farm hadn't prepared her for this. All around them, magic flared and weapons crashed together. She startled when a wild boar charged toward a student, then nearly screamed when it shifted into a leopard and went to pounce. Zedong kept telling her to focus on him, that the others weren't going to come charging toward them, but she couldn't help her reflexes when a roar or a sizzling snap sounded close behind her. By the end of practice, all Liena had to show for it were a few defensive maneuvers he'd taught her with a wooden practice sword. Finally, it was time to be done. Sopping wet with her own sweat, she trudged back to the dormitories, only to discover the long line for the washroom. She peeked outside at the lotus pond and thought it strange that only a fortnight ago she would have not hesitated to bathe in it. Now, not so much. She grabbed her white robes and waited in the line of girls nearly half her age. First day of class. She was determined to do the best she could. After washing and breakfast, everyone dispersed to their classes, obviously knowing exactly where to go. Liena fidgeted off to one side until a master was sent to rescue her and guide her to her classes. She was put with the first-year students for her academics, the 5- and 6-year-olds. She was only a millet farmer, so it wasn't like she had much in the way of pride. This stung even so. There is no use in embarrassment. Just do your best, she told herself. She sat cross-legged on her mat, feeling like a giant, which was an entirely new sensation. The master's smile faltered into confusion, then realization, when he saw her. She tried not to wince. Behind her, children whispered unintentionally loudly.
She's so old. Why is she with us? I heard she's new. She's got to have low magic then.
What kind of 5-year-olds talked like this? It seemed like everyone here, except maybe Zedong, was a prodigy of sorts. Not that it mattered. She would simply do her best. There was nothing else she could do. She couldn't expect to be a genius if she was 10 years behind. The moment that Liena realized this first class was reading and writing, she forgot all her wounded pride. Forgot all except the beautiful character the master drew for them.
Academy.
he said, pointing at it. In that instant, it was like a new world of possibilities opened up in her mind. She didn't mean to grin, but she couldn't help herself. Around her, fellow students bent over their little scrolls and drew the character in gloppy black ink. Holding a writing utensil in her fingers was strange and electrifying. Her hand shook as she drew the character once, then again and again. Already her hand seemed to take an affinity to the tool, and she kept grinning as she continued writing. Writing. When she finally looked up, she realized the master had drawn 3 more characters. Glancing around quickly, she saw they'd all moved on past that first character. Class went by way too fast. One minute she was frantically sketching the characters, and the next the master was saying to practice those characters on their lunch break and come back tomorrow with them memorized. An idea entered her mind, and though Liena was not an impulsive person, she gave in to this impulse. Gathering her things up in her arms, she approached the front of the classroom as the other students filed out. "Master?" she asked timidly. He looked up and cocked his head to one side.
Yes?
She bit her lip, then held out her board. "Could I have a few more?" The day went by in a flash. All her fears, stresses, and doubts that she had about coming to the academy were gone while she was in the classroom. She didn't care anymore that she was in the children's classes. All of this was just so new, so thrilling. She felt like a dying field of crops during a thunderstorm, drinking in every drop of knowledge. Perhaps succeeding here wasn't too out of reach for her. But then the bell rang again, and when she walked into her next classroom, it wasn't a classroom at all. It was a large training room, unusually plain for the typically ornate academy. It had square wooden pillars surrounding the matted training area. Sunlight streamed through the papered windows, and at the front of the room were wooden plaques fastened to 2 pillars with a painted character on each. She couldn't read them yet, but she took a stab in the dark and guessed they meant something like strength, discipline, determination, or endurance. This must be her first combat class.